Welcome to Blue Collar Reformation. Today is a long-awaited, long-researched subject matter of the Salem witch trials. Today here with John, as we've been studying this for quite a while. We first read through all the primary documents of the Salem witch trials a couple years ago and have returned to this subject because there are some things that need to be vindicated for the sake of the Protestant past on this subject. It's a really important subject because we've all heard of it. We've all studied it in school and college or whatever, but the problem is that it is gravely mistaken in the way that it's portrayed by almost everybody.
Yeah, and that's usually when, you get into those sentimental, podcasts and documentaries about, the hysterical teenage girls and, colonial patriarchy and the need to oppress women. But let me assure you, and I'm sure as you can guess by the fact that you're listening to us, we're not here to repeat the tired cliches handed down from Arthur Miller or modern academia's guilt-ridden obsession with everything, pre-Enlightenment or,
Right.
pre-modern.
Yeah.
We're here to contend for the truth, and not just of history, but of theology and the duties of the civil magistrate.
And anti-modernism to the core.
Yeah, because contrary to popular belief, the Puritan clergy and magistrates who oversaw the proceedings weren't room temperature IQ fundamentalists and mystics. I mean, quite the opposite. These were men who were rigorously educated scholastics, many of whom earned their doctors of law, theology, and science. Those are the only things that you could get a doctorate in back then.
Right.
Before reaching the age of majority, I believe Cotton Mather, in fact, we'll be talking about him. He got his first PhD at the age of 11.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
These were you compare our professors in our academia to the Puritans, and the Puritans are head and shoulders.
So John Owen was a slacker at 14 getting
yeah,
his PhD.
yeah, no, it's oh, you only got your PhD at 14. What a loser!
Come on, man.
Yeah,
yeah. Increase Mather was the president of Harvard.
Yeah,
he wrote a book on this subject, actually, ex post facto.
No, and in fact, the people that we're talking about are literally the people who founded Harvard.
See, this right off the bat makes me realize I wasted so much of my youth. I could have been working on my academics so much more fully.
Yeah. So with this in mind, today we're going to reclaim the trials from the hands of revisionists, atheists, Wiccans, and modern critical theory brain rotted academics who presently shuffle down the halls of Cambridge, and hand them back where they belong, to the reformed conscience of the 17th century godly commonwealth. The Salem witch trials are not, as many would say, an embarrassment to the Christian tradition. They were instead a hard-handed, serious-minded attempt to apply biblical law and common law in the face of real threats, spiritual, legal, and criminal.
So that's one of the main things to see in here, is that this is a matter of criminal law being brought to bear upon the society at the time. So Cotton Mather was a judge, and one of the things that they had to deal with was the supernatural in the courtroom, the supernatural in the testimonies, and then what do you do with it? There's a bunch of notes throughout the documents that are taken by the judge into the record to state basically the frustration at every point on the problem of, okay, we're dealing with the supernatural, but can we make that admissible in court? And he starts with yes, and then ends up making a declaration that it cannot be admissible, actually. And so the criminality is really the key.
Right. So let's go back to 1692. So in 1692, the Massachusetts Bay Colony wasn't a colony in decline. It was, in many ways, a theological triumph. This is a land founded on Scripture, with biblical law and the advancement of the Christian religion embedded in their founding charter. But it was also a land that was reeling. King Philip's War, which, I advise you, all listeners to go and look that up. It's probably the first actual and only, I would say, actual apocalyptic event on the American continent. Just in terms of percentage of population who died, it was horrific. So that was spilling blood across the frontier, driving refugees down into Massachusetts from Maine. And they brought with them the horrific tales of Indian raids that were often aided by the French Jesuits, who used the natives as proxies in their war against Protestants. Famine threatened, disease lingered, and the governor was away fighting, and the devils were restless. And into this fraught climate came a sickness, not of the body. There was enough bodily sickness going around, but this is a new sickness of the soul. The affliction begins with children in the home And soon there are shrieks in the meeting house, contortions in court, and accusations that strain credulity, or at least modern credulity.
Yeah, so this is one of the main key assumptions. When you come to the Salem witch trials, you always get this sort of feminist trope of, women being repressed and that the supernatural is not real and that they're just like spiritual, man. It's kind of recast into a modern hippie age of Aquarius kind of new age spirituality. And the practice of these things obviously became very popular in the 1990s. When I was a kid, there were actually ads on TV that would warn you that if you knew anybody who was practicing witchcraft, you should let the FBI know. I know you weren't born yet when there was those. I kid you not. You could probably look them up on YouTube. Actually, we should find that after. And
yeah, cut it
so you can see I'm not a crazy person. These were real commercials that were on TV. You could probably look them up on YouTube. Actually, we should find that after. And
yeah, cut it.
So you can see I'm not a crazy person. These were real commercials that were on TV.
A growing concern over the mushrooming attraction towards the occult. Heinous crimes connected with the occult, according to police, are reaching epidemic proportions. Halloween is the time when community service organizations warn that children and animals are most likely to be abducted.
To believe in the frightening growth of Satanism or not, the fact is that a highly organized network of Satanists are operating in America and Europe today. They seem to be respectable members of society and are integrated into all professions and walks of life.
Satanism exists in this country as it exists elsewhere. It is appallingly evil. It is about murder. It is about child abuse. It's about sexual abuse. It is no joke and must be taken seriously and must be dealt with.
But this is in an uptick right now, and we need to reject the works of the devil. But we also need to dispel the mischaracterization of history with regard to this subject, because it is not a matter of the patriarchy keeping down strong women. Right. It's a matter of the supernatural being a reality and the worship of evil beings being false.
Right. So Salem, kind of gets taken over by this, by this event, by these events of supernatural activity. And let's not forget the backing for this. There were witnesses, hundreds of them. This wasn't mass hysteria. This was simply just witness accounts, and it was all done through legal means. Testified under oath of physical harm, property loss, animals gone mad, children driven into seizures, and even supernatural feats of strength. One defendant, the key defendant in this case, George Burroughs, was said to have lifted a barrel by its bunghole, and yes, that is the technical name. That is the technical name. You can blame the French, as we often do on this show,
for the etymology of the word.
Yeah, for the etymology of the word being abused into slang.
Yeah, he lifted it with a single finger, and it was according to Cotton Mather's description, it had to be lifted by two men.
Right.
It was like a two-man job.
But he simply was able to loop his finger in and lift it.
Right.
So supernatural feats of strength. Another key defendant, Bridget Bishop, had rag dolls filled with hog bristles and pins. So basically voodoo dolls. Right. Classic implements of witchcraft found within the walls of her home.
So these are weird circumstantial things, because they are not. It's not a crime to have supernatural strength, right?
Yeah.
But Cotton Mather talks about this. Actually, Increase Mather talks about this in his book. Is the problem of what do you do with the supernatural that you see? It's part of the trial, and there's he calls it falterings and faultiness in the proceedings, but yet it's still part of their testimony. So,
and that's really where the modern narrative of the whole trial starts to kind of die and be exposed as fraudulent, because the court didn't simply just hang people on the basis of X person said they saw this thing. Well, no, it was actually real crimes that were committed. The witnesses were, there were witnesses, depositions, affidavits, everything in these courts, which led to convictions. So let's dispel that notion right now. So let's actually enter the courtroom when these witch trials were going on. This is where things get really strange, as if they weren't before. Strange enough that even a modern reader, jaded by horror films and possessed TikToks, don't look at.
That's a thing.
No, it's real. Don't look and don't look it up. might pause. Because what happened in Salem wasn't the stuff of folk rumors alone. It was a full-on courtroom theater of spiritual warfare. And importantly, it was also a forensic investigation of actual crimes, complete with physical evidence, sworn depositions, meticulous record-taking, and basically this was no mob with pitchforks. This was a functioning colonial court. And we're going to hammer that over and over and over again throughout this episode. These weren't simply, this isn't like theocratic court in Saudi Arabia or Iran, where basically it's like, oh, you have a jinn, we have to, it's like you have low dean, you're going to prison.
Right. So, one of the main arguments that Mather made with regard to the use of the spectral evidence that happened before the waking eyes of those in the courtroom was that they were going to be embarrassed if word got back to England.
Right.
If this sort of proceeding happened and they found in their court records of their colonies that they were taking spectral evidence into, spectral events into evidence in a court case.
Yeah, I mean, that could look bad.
Yeah.
Just like
they were hanging on by a thread. They were not doing this just as a fly-by-night thing. They wanted to be acceptable and accepted by the powers that be as a legitimate court. So it's important to recognize.
But with that said, let's actually get into the spectral phenomena, because the spectral phenomena, even though they weren't admissible in court, they were still attested to very well, meticulously documented, being seen by people in the courtroom as evidence that there probably was something going on. During the examination of Bridget Bishop, for example, who would be the first person to be executed, multiple afflicted girls collapsed on the courtroom floor the moment she entered. When she merely looked at them, they began to convulse. They also mirrored her movements to a T, a level of precision not possible by a sheer Meisner exercise, as even the movement of Bishop's eyes was perfectly mirrored. This was as she feigned ignorance to the prosecution that she knew not even of what witchcraft or a witch was.
That's one of the funniest actually sections of it. Like, and I mean funny, like it's actually kind of hilarious because the prosecuting attorney is asking her things like, okay, do you practice witchcraft? And then she says, I don't even know what a witch is. And then he says, well, are you a witch? And she says, no, I'm no witch. And he says, how can you know you're not a witch if you do not know what a witch is?
So I don't know what it is. I just know I'm not one.
It's something straight out of Monty Python. It's crazy.
Yeah. This was also mirrored in the case of Abigail Soames, who also produced the same effect, being mirrored action, convulsing when she was in their presence on the afflicted. Dramatic is an understatement when it really comes to these trials, because in the case of Ann Putnam Jr., she declared that a black looming apparition nearly 9 feet tall stood in the courtroom, and it was visible to all in the courtroom. Which, I mean, let's just go through like how that would have been. It's like, jury, please disregard the 9 foot tall demonic apparition in the corner.
This is not admissible in court. Yeah.
It's like, bailiff, do something.
Yeah, whatever you can do.
In another case, a spectral yellow bird, visible only to the afflicted this time, perched on Sarah Good's shoulder, allegedly suckling between her fingers as a demonic familiar. Susanna Martin's specter was seen with a winged creature and a black pig. In the trial of the aforementioned George Burroughs, the specter of a man in black appeared, I assume the same as the prior 9 foot tall looming apparition, and the ghost of his dead wives also manifested, accusing him of murdering them, which Hubie later found out to actually have murdered him. Yeah. One girl in court claimed the specter of Goody Osborne, another accused witch, sent a wolf-like black beast to bite her on the shoulder, which then began to bleed in full view of everyone. Again, it's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, literally they saw an apparition and it drew physical blood in the courtroom. And, Cotton Mather and the defense and prosecution lawyers.
It's like, jury, disregard that.
The notes throughout the proceedings, it's just, the word to use is frustration. Like,
yeah.
What do we do in this case?
Right.
Because Cotton Mather had made a declaration, like I said earlier, that even though earlier in the beginning of the trials, they were actually charged with witchcraft, there were warrants out for their arrest for witchcraft, which were signed by the judges. The prosecution attorney who went to William and Mary's, I forget his name at the moment, he went to William and Mary's College. He also co-signed them and everything. So they send these out, but later, after the trial proceedings began, the charges that were then actually brought were not with regard to witchcraft. That was circumstantial to the subject matter. It was the crimes they committed against the people that resulted in the actual executions of those people. So, for example, George Burroughs, it was his wives,
Right.
really the two mysterious deaths and apparent murder of his wives.
Yeah, and we'll go into that because another, just to round out the spectral evidence here, we have another claim: the specter of John Willard in the courtroom threatened to cut her throat with an invisible knife. And then there's, and this is where it gets like really wild. So if that wasn't wild enough, here we have it, and this is a common theme throughout this entire trial, and the entire Salem witch phenomenon
outside the courtroom too.
Yeah. Multiple witnesses testified to men turning into dogs and back again. Cotton Mather mentions this,
right.
In his defense of the trials, is that you can't deny it. Literally, it happened.
Right.
It would have been almost. You also have to be bordering on your own level of incredulousness.
Right.
To deny all of these eyewitness accounts.
Now that's an important point to bring up. Is one of the tactics of the devil is to confuse and terrify, right? He can bring people into the false assumption, which he's full of lies, right? And the assumption is he can do something to you. He can't do anything that is not allowed in God's good providence for the sake of your salvation to do to you.
Right.
In fact, everything the devil's ever done always turns out for the good of the salvation of God's people. So it's a fallacy that we have to reject, that we are faced with by way of these things, these specters. But in the case of a courtroom, what are you going to do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's you can't make the basis of your legal theory the devil steps on a rake and hits himself in the face over and over and over again.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Mather, he appealed to a case law of a similar series of trials that happened in Sweden. So it's an interesting thing that he was trying to defend the way the trials proceeded to the watching world so that they didn't seem like a bunch of crazy people. And yet there is craziness. I mean, this is craziness.
Right. So it is crazy, and it's laughable to the modern mind because we're a strictly materialist culture now. We don't accept that there is any... I mean, we've gone even to reject basic concepts such as metaphysical reality and epistemology in our daily lives. So, I mean, the idea that there could be supernatural activity is completely dismissed by the modern mind. That's not the same world that the Puritans were living in. They had a much more grounded worldview when it came to these kinds of things. But like we've been saying, they didn't convict anyone on this basis alone. Not a single execution in Salem was based upon spectral evidence, whether it be ghosts, goblins, and there were goblins.
Yeah.
There be goblins.
Yeah.
Or girls in fits.
That's actually one of the stranger ones too. Is this guy, he is the neighbor of Sarah Good. So one of the defendants, right? He's the neighbor of Sarah Good. And he writes in his affidavit, his deposition for the court, that he went outside and he saw Sarah Good walking in the orchard, and they shared, they were neighbors, right? So
right.
Her orchard's right next to his orchard. So he sees her walking in the orchard. He goes back inside and he's like, there's a goblin inside his house. And he yells, "The full armor of God between me and thee." And then it leaps away and out into the orchard, and it kicks mud up on him, but he swings a stick at it, and he disables his arm apparently by swinging the stick. I don't know, he swung the stick so hard.
Well, I mean, hey, if you're confronted by a literal goblin, you might just
of all the things to say, that's a pretty good thing to say. The armor of God between me and thee,
right?
And then hey, resist the devil and he will flee. But I mean, that's not an experience I've had in my life.
No.
I gotta say,
It's an experience I don't want to have in my
No,
life.
yeah.
So the court required corroboration for actual crimes to have convictions of people, and they got it. In many cases, they didn't, because people were exonerated during the Salem witch trials. Nobody mentions this, but there were exonerations. It's like, okay, we can't indict you. We indicted you, but we can't convict you upon spectral evidence alone, so we have to render a non-guilty verdict. They were being very legally sound in this case. But in the cases where people were found guilty, let's turn to the actual crimes. So, let's start with Bridget Bishop, the first to be executed. She wasn't convicted because girls screamed when she looked at them, or mirrored her movements like they were on puppet strings in the courtroom. No. She was convicted because John and William Bly found poppets, small dolls made of rags and hog's bristles with pins stuck in them, walled up in her cellar. One of them even had a needle through its heart. These were traditional implements of Maleficium.
Maleficium.
Maleficium, okay.
Yeah.
Intended to cause harm to specific people. And the Blys weren't alone. Multiple neighbors testified that Bishop had been seen consorting with strange men at night, threatening livestock and bragging about her powers. One man said she'd promised that his pig would die, and it did within a day, frothing at the mouth and throwing itself against a fence, having found to have been poisoned by Bishop. Also, on the nights of May 31st to June 2nd, she broke into Richard Coleman's home with two women and attempted to poison him as he slept on multiple occasions, even attempting to murder him with his own sword as he slept.
Yeah, that's a crazy one. So Richard Coleman, he sees the apparition of her, and she's like trying to hold him down and trying to poison him. Like she appears, and she's wearing. So he says he and his wife are laying in bed. They wake up. She walks in with two other women he doesn't recognize, and she's wearing a red bodice. And he's like, well, this is strange. He's like, these are a good Christian couple, right? And they're like, what in the world? But they're struck dumb. And then like he like pushes her off, and then like they leave, and he's so freaked out by this because it then happens again the next night, and they're just appearing and disappearing out of the house and everything. And I don't know, do they not have door locks or whatever? Just barricade the door. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, so he has he says, my kinsman, William, and another woman to stay with his wife. And like they all stay, they're up all evening. It says while they were talking with each other, they all like Sarah Good and the other women come in, and he's got his sword, and she like grabs his sword and tries to kill him with the sword. He says, I held my sword thirst on my stomach as hard as I could so that she couldn't take it from me. So it's attempted murder.
Right.
That's the problem.
So poisoning livestock and attempted murder is what got Bridget Bishop executed. Or consider George Burroughs, the former pastor. This was no simple case of the girls didn't like him. Burroughs was accused by multiple confessed witches as a ringleader of a diabolical covenant. Witnesses testify that he possessed preternatural strength, lifting a musket by sticking two fingers in the barrel and holding it out straight, one-handed. Which, I mean, that's quite a feat.
Yeah, I guess it was a 7-foot long barrel on the gun.
Yeah.
By the way. So, yeah.
Just with one finger holding it straight out. No difficulty or anything. More disturbing, Burroughs was accused of killing his wives. When pressed on the matter, he could not produce a proper Christian baptism or burial for one of them. A shocking omission that day. But the kicker was the confessions. Multiple accused witches testified under oath that Burroughs led them into a black mass, baptized them in the devil's service, and conducted mock communions.
Yeah, so there's a lot on George Burroughs, but one of the main things that they pointed out, this is interesting, is in his defense, he was pointing out that he had recently taken communion at two churches. And there's an accusation against him with regard to his kids that only one of his kids was baptized. And so the rest not being baptized was really suspect at the time.
Yeah.
And so it seems to be that the court is putting together a timeline of where did this go off? And, how sad is this that in the church that the minister of the town of Wells, that pastor was actually the ringleader, according to 8 of the other witches who testified against him, that he was actually the ringleader of the whole thing to begin with.
Yeah, the
accused of murdering both of his wives, who were kept in, according to the accusations from the neighbors about the wives, kept in a sort of slavery. And it just absolutely horrifying kind of the thing. So if this is a feminist trope, the whole Salem witch trial of the patriarchy keeping down strong women.
Right.
It really falls apart when you think that the ringleader of the whole thing was this guy, George Burroughs,
Who killed 2 of his
who
wives.
killed 2 wives in succession and was just an absolute monster in everything that is written about him. Again, apparitions in the courtroom, the things, all kinds of things like that with him. So.
Yeah. So then we have John and Lydia Porter, who gave testimony that Sarah Good had muttered curses at them, and when turned away begging, after which their cows stopped giving milk, 1 cow died, having been poisoned, so poisoning livestock. We'll talk about Sarah Good some more later, but we got to get to Martha Carrier. Now, this one's one of the really weird ones. She wasn't executed because a girl screamed in the courtroom. She was executed because her own sons confessed that she had brought them to a witch meeting, had them ride a wooden pole through the sky. And at those meetings, she was declared the Queen of Hell. Multiple neighbors accused her of cursing their livestock, poisoning them, poisoning their children, and threatening them with death. And then those deaths actually occurred after, again, more poisoning. These weren't speculations. These were sworn depositions backed by dates and details. So back to Sarah Good. Sarah Good was indeed a witch, having received visions of spectral men and spectral animals enlisting her service.
Yeah, basically, so the record that she gave was that, so Sarah Good said about herself that the way she was brought into it was that a man appeared to her and said, "Serve me." And then she didn't do anything about it. Then a bird appeared to her or came to her and said, "Serve me." And then 2 cats after that. And then she would send the cats to go afflict people, and she would bite them, and having bit them, then they would be afflicted by the,
Right.
familiar spirits. So that's the kind of lady she was.
Right. But what ultimately found her guilty, because again, we're dealing with law here, was a broken knife which she had used in an attempted murder on Thomas Putnam Jr., corroborated by witnesses, including her own husband, who, as you were saying,
Sarah Good's husband, his only testimony was about her being the enemy of all good. Now, her name is good. His name is good.
Right.
And he says that she is the enemy of all that is good. So it was a man of few words, but that was his testimony to the court. So.
Yeah. So then we've got a really weird one here. Tituba, who was a slave girl, a Native American slave girl in the colony, baked witch cake, which was made out of rye meal, mixed with the afflicted girl's urine, and then fed to town people's dogs in February 1692 under the direction of neighbor Mary Sibley. The girls fell into more violent fits. The crime wasn't mere witchcraft, but the poisoning of an animal and also probably sexual perversion.
Yeah, where do you get the urine from? The victims. How do you do that?
Yeah.
No. Now, another interesting thing about Tituba is that she actually ratted out the other witches.
Yeah, she eventually flipped on them.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the things that's kind of interesting is you actually find, like, okay, which one snitches? Well, which snitches first?
Yeah.
And do which snitches get stitches?
I don't know. They probably get hexed.
I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah.
Pun,
So let's put it plainly. There was criminal conspiracy afoot. Not merely imagined, but confessed to by dozens. These weren't coerced out of silence. The confessions were disturbing, grotesque, and self-condemning, and they came in freely, often with corroborating testimony or physical effects. Despite the fact that there was clearly something going on here supernaturally, these accounts merely scratched the surface of the litany of supernatural accounts of the kind. The magistrates did not, and I repeat, did not admit the spectral evidence into court, rather focusing on the actual offenses for convictions. They were not executed for being witches, though they were executed for breaking actual case law.
Yeah, so that's key. Were they witches? Yes, they confessed to it, most of them. Others were accused. Were they convicted for being witches? No. And that is the thing that is left out of every college lecture, every pontification from every professor throughout our land. And it needs to be
every
set straight.
BuzzFeed article.
Right.
Back when BuzzFeed was a thing.
Right.
It's like, I'm young and I'm dating myself there.
Yeah.
So the records speak. The court did not accept mere hysteria. It demanded evidence. rejected mere accusation, and yes, though the afflicted were allowed to testify, their visions never sealed a man or a woman's fate. Let the scoffers mock, let the postmodernists squeak about the patriarchy and epistemic violence. We have the court records, we have the petitions, and we have a theology about this. The Puritans weren't stupid, they weren't bloodthirsty, they were the guardians of Christian polity in a world where the devil still prowls. They dared to take seriously what we now dismiss in foolishness. And in doing so, we, as modern men, in all of our reason and self-confidence and materialistic thinking, have become the devil's sport.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, that's perhaps the most convicting thing of all, is that we no longer recognize that there is, in fact, a world which we cannot see.
Yeah, we have to, as Christians, we have to remember that angels and devils, they are real. We don't see them. And that's really the whole point. Like Psalm 115, I was recently talking about this. People complain, where is your God? So Psalm 115, verse 3, the Gentiles say, where is your God? And the answer from Israel is, our God is in heaven.
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole point. Your idols are physical and they're dumb. Our God is in heaven. He's not seen. That's the whole point. The reality of the non-physical world. And so if you go back to our series on apologetics, you remember I talk about the non-physical realities that we live with, that words are non-physical realities, thought is non-physical realities, and these things will communicate back and forth between each other. And we have to realize that we live in a world that is both flesh and spirit, and we must reject in our consciences and with our words and with our actions the works of the devil. Resist him, and he will flee.
Yeah. So even though that wasn't the basis for the convictions, that shows where this leads. When you have this manifest spiritual darkness, it's usually going to lead to, poisoning people's livestock and attempting to murder them while they sleep.
Yeah. Urine cakes, mass hysteria.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that, this has been Blue Collar Reformation, vindicating the good name of Increase and Cotton Mather and the Massachusetts Bay Colony and Salem, Massachusetts. Have a nice day.
Yeah. See ya.
Thank you for watching Blue Collar Reformation. We are here to equip you with wisdom of the Word. The aim is to apply the system of doctrine taught in Scripture to every square inch of faith and life. We are on Twitter and Substack for your sake. Links are in the description. Share with your recalcitrant and reprobate friends and family freely. Blue Collar Reformation is a lightweight and mobile outreach platform. Take it in hand and enter the fray. Godspeed.